Good afternoon, and thank you for joining me, incredible panel of well-known and well-respected Capital Region philanthropic leaders for what I know is going to be a thought-provoking, insightful, energetic, and passionate discussion. My name is Marcia Cognetta, and I lead corporate giving and philanthropy for Goldman Sachs ACO Personal Financial Management. I had the incredible opportunity of meeting and collaborating with these dynamic change makers on several impactful initiatives last year, and I can assure you, you're in for a treat today. I'm aiming to leave some time at the end of today's session for Q&A, so please type your questions in the comments box and we'll get to as many as possible. And with that, I'm pleased to introduce you to Shelly Connolly, Vice President, Community Grant Making from the Community Foundation for the Greater Capital Region, Kathy Lanny, Chief Community Officer at CEFCU, and Jillian Pasco, Senior Vice President and Albany Hudson Valley Market Executive at Bank of America. Shelly, Kathy, and Jillian, as a fellow funder who admires each of you and the impact that you make on our communities, I'm really excited for you to share today your perspective and insights on the opportunities and challenges during the pandemic, lessons learned, and your calls to action on how to best support food systems and assist in ending hunger. Now let's jump right in because I know we have a lot to cover, and Kathy, we're going to start with you. The pandemic created a devastating increase in food insecurity. But at your direction, CEFCU has been making a significant impact and investment in food systems for many years and long before the pandemic. Why has hunger been such a priority for you?
Well, you know, we've heard everyone say today that no one should go hungry, and we all know that to be true. In the land of plenty, why do we have hungry people? And I think, you know, it's unacceptable. We have to recognize that it is unacceptable. And I think this pandemic, as we've all shared, has just heightened the awareness. This is a problem that has been going on well before this pandemic. You know, I think for CEFCU, our funding priorities, we start with Maslow's hierarchy of need, and we focus on the basic needs in our communities, certainly hunger being one of them. You know, I don't know. I feel that hunger, when you have a hungry person or a hungry family, that just causes that individual or that family to spiral downward, right? Children are unable to learn. We have increased absenteeism, both at work and in our schools. And our community health issues just come to the surface, certainly heart disease, diabetes, obesity due to poor nutrition. This actually, at times, has kept me up at night. You know, how do we fix this problem? I think as a community, up until the pandemic, we've been very good at serving the problem. And now I'm thrilled to see that collectively we're all focusing on solving the problem. So I'm very excited about what I've heard today thus far, what I've seen as a result of the pandemic, and I think where we're all going together.
Terrific. Shelly and Jillian, do you want to weigh in?
I'd love to piggyback on Kathy's remarks. I think for us at Bank of America, it's the same sentiment in mind for CEFCU that Kathy had shared. But I think it's also the snowball effect, right? And Kathy, you alluded to this a little bit, right? So access to basic human needs like food or a safe place to stay, right? Like some sort of shelter can directly affect everything else, right? So things are impacted whether you have a good paying job, which may then directly affect your access to basic human needs. It can then snowball into access to safe, affordable, and decent housing, right? It's a long-term systemic issue that we're experiencing in this community. And unless we're going to address the actual problem versus these constant band-aids, it's going to continue. So for us, it's really, really important that we establish long-term systems that are going to actually offer change over time, and doing so collectively is so important. So I think that today's conversation is definitely going to be a good starting point and continuation of the work that we've done throughout the pandemic.
Fantastic. Now, Shelly, at the Community Foundation for the Greater Capital Region, did the pandemic motivate a shift in funding priorities or practices? And if so, how?
Yeah, thank you, Marcia, and thank you to CEFCU and Food Pantries for bringing us all together this afternoon. And I feel I'd be remiss if I didn't just give a quick shout out to our not-for-profit community. Thank you for all the hard work that you've done this past year in particular. We funders are honored to be able to support the work that you provide to our communities. So to answer your question, Marcia, the pandemic absolutely caused a shift in our funding priorities and practices. Here at the foundation, we granted a record $10 million in 2020 from a typical year of about $6 million. So that's pretty indicative of our donors really stepping up to provide financial support where they knew it was needed. And in most cases, grant support was shifted to general operating, unrestricted support, because we as funders are aware that the not-for-profits know exactly what they need to do. We trust them. They know where the support is needed. In addition, as soon as the pandemic rose to the frightening levels locally in March of 2020, the Community Foundation, United Way of the Greater Capital Region, MVP Healthcare, and Troy Savings Bank Charitable Foundation sat down to create the Capital Region COVID-19 Response Fund. Housed here at the foundation as a pass-through fund, all the money that came in went right back out, and we're happy to report that we were able to get about $1.171 million back into the community during the pandemic.
That's incredible. And thank you for bringing funders like us together, so quickly last year and under such dire circumstances. And we are going to circle back on the COVID-19 fund in a little bit. So thank you for bringing it up. But Jillian, I'm curious, at Bank of America, how did the pandemic shift your funding priorities?
Yeah, so us, similar to a lot of our partners that we see on the screen here today, it shifted dramatically, right? So prior to COVID, we were always focused on basic human needs as one of our primary funding principles, but it wasn't the only funding principle that we were focused on. Throughout COVID, the foundation made it very clear that nationally, we really needed to make sure that we directed as many local resources towards basic human needs to have the biggest impact as humanly possible. So to give you an example, my local allocation and budget from the Bank of America Charitable Foundation, 45% of it was focused on addressing basic human needs, specifically hunger relief, right? Whereas in years past, that probably would have been somewhere between 20 and 25%. So, we're talking almost double. Additionally, we have received another allocation specific to addressing COVID needs, right? So supplemental funding from the foundation that was spread across the entire country, and each local market received a piece of the pie, if you will. And the vast majority of that was spent on hunger relief and basic needs here in the Albany-Hudson Valley region for us, with a small component of it being focused on platforming opportunities for virtual education, right? Moving things from in-person to virtual. And then, of course, as probably many people know, back in June, and this was a culmination of COVID and the murder of George Floyd, the organization announced a $1.25 billion 5-year initiative in an effort to address and meet the needs of racial inequity in our local community. So that's something that we're highly focused on and that directly came out of the pandemic. And I'll speak more to that later on.
That's incredible. Thank you. And Kathy, how about you over at SEFCU?
Well, we did like everyone else. We quickly got on the phone and just started talking to our nonprofit partners. I kidded around a little bit. I said I felt like Lucy from Charlie Brown, the counselor is in for 5 cents, or was it 50? I can't remember. But I think, we quickly shifted into action. Certainly, we created an emergency funding application on our portal to just bring it down to the very basic questions, which I think people felt really, encouraged by, and it was helpful to them. They were barely hanging on, so the last thing they needed was a long application for funding. But we were very, very proactive. We reached out to organizations. In addition to providing emergency funding to them, we also were very busy doing supplies. So PPE, cleaning supplies, things that were very difficult for everyone to get, but certainly nonprofits to get with limited resources, both in people and financial resources. We were able to quickly supply those and continue to supply those. We also stood up Heroes Landing, which was the takeover, I'll call it, of the Hilton Garden Inn to provide respite care to the healthcare heroes, both in all of our hospitals, Albany Med and St. Peter's, to assist for those 2 months in getting folks that break that they needed. So we were kind of a little bit all over the place, but I think the focus was on just listening, trying to meet the needs as they came forward, and finding ways to get creative to meet those needs.
That's incredible. Really, really incredible that all of you committed to prioritizing healthy food, and all of the other needs that arose in 2020. You certainly had to pivot unexpectedly to be able to deliver. So thank you for doing that. And as we know, providing access to healthy food is, extremely, extremely important, and so much more to people and communities than just satiating appetites, right? So, Jillian, I imagine at the outset of the pandemic, you spent some time really thinking about how to communicate your changes in priorities and to applicants and community partners. So how did you do that, and how was it received?
Yeah, so it was very grassroots, right? Very organic, having a lot of conversations with the boots on the ground and our nonprofit partners. And for us, we have an 8-county region that we service. So we encompass the Capital Region, but also the Hudson Valley region. So we're always mindful of, which of our partners can serve the entire region, right? Like what's kind of a one-stop shop, and what ones have the largest impact versus necessarily focusing on like a single county or a single neighborhood. How can we get the resources in the hands of those that are delivering across our entire footprint as quickly as possible? So it was pretty clear that there were a handful of partners that had the largest impacts. We've spent a lot of time and focused primarily on those particular organizations initially, and connecting them with, similar to CEFCU, an abbreviated platform for application. And then also looking internally, right? Like what other resources do we have access to? Oftentimes the foundation is exceptionally generous and offers additional opportunity for the local market to apply internally for additional funds. So we were able to apply and receive a significant amount of funds that actually doubled our local budget here in an effort to address basic needs and put that money right in the hands of the nonprofits that would have the largest impact. So just having those conversations with the nonprofits, shifting from programmatic to operational, similar to some of our partners on the line today, has been really, really important. And we continue to look at things in that regard. We continue to provide access to things like PPE, masks, sanitizer, glove, right? Those things are still really, really important, but just making sure that as we're having conversations with our partners that we're addressing every need that they have, that we have the potential to address.
Terrific. Did either of you have a different method or a different experience with communicating the changes in your priorities?
Again, we got on the phone. We started to call our nonprofit partners who we knew were doing this work and said, what do you need? In some cases, we knew that we were providing, either a year-end donation of significance or part of a multi-year gift. We called them up. Do you want it now? Do you need it now? What do you need? So it was really trying to be as proactive as we could and get the word out that we were here to, kind of all hands on deck to meet the needs as they came forward, because so much was happening and changing. And so many of our nonprofit organizations were inundated with increased need and increased ability to provide services, but they were also having their own struggles with people to meet those needs. So it was just an ever-changing landscape. So I think we all had to just be open. We had to listen, do a lot of listening, and then try to collectively problem solve.
Terrific. And I know the group of us has spoken about the emergency Band-Aid programs, right? The emergency programs that came together around food during the pandemic, food drops and Feed Albany, government funding and others, which were all critical but short-term emergency support that were never intended to be long-term solutions to hunger. So Shelley, can you talk about your concerns related to hunger now, that many of those programs have wound down and no longer exist and will not continue to exist?
Yeah, of course. So, Marsha, those food programs and others that popped up throughout the community during this difficult time were obviously vital. That they were very important. And so many times since then, I've heard donors say, well, I don't think food is an issue right now. And it just makes me cringe, because food is an issue. It will always be an issue, So over and over again this morning, we continue to hear that there was a hunger crisis before the pandemic. Right? And so we can't say we hope to get back to normal, quote unquote, because normal was not okay. So I think, everyone keeps saying this is the time. This is when we have to recognize now is the time for change. So the food programs that popped up, they were all a great way for philanthropists to provide support in the hunger arena, if you will. But real systemic change is going to require state, federal regulations. The philanthropic world sometimes has a hard time in those arenas. So it was really nice for us to have a spot to put some funds and know that we were really making a difference.
That's incredible. Thank you. And yes, identifying long-term solutions to support, to stabilize food security has been important to all of you, especially during and coming out of the pandemic. And Kathy, in one of our last discussions, you talked about how passionate you are about a social enterprise model. So can you talk about what that means and then share an example or two of a transformational program that you've created to address hunger?
Sure. So this really started out with a conversation between myself and our CEO, Michael Castellana, about the issue of hunger. And actually, it was at the original Food Summit where we were a sponsor, and he was sitting next to me. And as we listened to the Alice report, I saw him getting redder and redder, right? Then he disappeared, which is trouble for me because I knew he was talking to other people that would require me to have to do something pretty grand. But, I think as a result of that, one thing he said that really stuck out to me is we're all smart people and we need to figure this out, and we can figure this out if we work together. So it was really a shift for us to not only just provide that safety net funding, which you have to do that, but then carve off some dollars to actually invest in trying to create something to solve the problem. So we were at the World Business Forum in New York. We saw this gentleman, Stephen Ritz, jumping all over the stage, talking about Tower Gardens in the South Bronx and how that really transformed the educational system and the part of the hunger problem in the Bronx through hydroponic gardening. So I'm at one end of Radio City Music Hall, and Michael was somewhere else, and I'm texting him, we need to do this. We need to do this. So as a result of that event, we really started to do some research about what was out there, and we ended up settling on freight farming. So in 2018, our first freight farm was delivered in the back of our building at 700 Patroon. Now, when I looked back at my job description, farmer was not there, but it's been probably one of the most rewarding things that I've been able to help stand up in our community. And so we wanted proof of concept. Could we do this? Could anyone anywhere grow and be successful? And so we hit the ground running and are producing over 630 to 50 heads of lettuce and herbs a week that we have been donating out into our community. So from the very beginning, some of that produce went into our own cafe to feed our own staff. And then since the pandemic, it's been 100% out into the community. So we have reached out to those organizations to provide that healthy, fresh lettuce. So then, once we figured out we could do this, we thought anybody can. So we really wanted to empower our nonprofit partners to be able to use this farm, to be able to create an enterprise where they could sustain themselves through the sale of their produce. So the Boys and Girls Club was our first initiative, and then we just recently this winter put the second farm down at the Schenectady City Mission. And it's our plan to grow these farms, bring these farms out into our community at least 2 a year, and build a community of farmers that are bringing healthy produce out into our communities.
Oh, that's absolutely amazing. Shelley, Jillian, do you have any social enterprise work that you're working on right now, or thoughts about that?
I just want to say that I actually witnessed the pod. I went down to the Boys and Girls Club and walked through the pod, and it was very cool. And it was fun to watch. The children are so excited about it. I think that's the other part of it that we forget, how excited they are and proud. Really, really, really good stuff.
That's incredible. Absolutely incredible. Well, clearly there were many lessons that we learned during the pandemic. And so now I want to focus on the top 3 lessons that you all feel most strongly about. And we're going to start with funding. So Shelley, I know that you're really passionate about fostering trust with nonprofits. Your funding, you mentioned it at the start of our talk today. How has the pandemic shifted the way that you require nonprofits to use grants that they receive from you and report on the usage of those dollars?
Yeah, so, again, we recognize that no one knows the community like our not-for-profits. They're the boots on the ground. They're the trusted individuals. The community really needs them. And so we've been encouraging our donors and the foundations with whom we work to try to pivot to a general operating support so that the not-for-profits have some slush money, if you will, if they need to pay the rent, if they, whatever they need to do with that money. We've been trying to use simpler application forms if we can, sometimes just a simple narrative. We have some very pointed questions from some of our foundations that are really just looking to catch up and find out what's going on. And then from a reporting standpoint, again, simple narratives. It doesn't have to be complicated. We know you're doing what you need to do. With the COVID response fund, we didn't require any follow-up whatsoever, which was great because our not-for-profits didn't need that hanging over them. So those are some of the ways that we tried to support in 2020 as best we could.
That's terrific. Does everybody else agree with that shift? Jillian,
Yeah. Absolutely. No, I think that that's so important. Even prior to the pandemic, we never had a mandate of our nonprofits following up with us, although I think that they always do because they're always so good and proactive about it. And I always tell them, right, because oftentimes we're on a call with them before they apply. And I'm like, I don't need to hear about your mission and your application. You only have so many characters, right? I know what you do. Like, let's get right down to the nuts and the bolts of what it is you're trying to accomplish and figure out what that looks like. So I think that became more important now than it ever has. And that's something that will continue to stay for us as well.
We still look for outcomes. I guess we're the bad guy here. We still look for them, but not when it came to the emergency funding. It was really, tell me what you're going to do. One of the things we did is we partnered with News 10 on a No Neighbor Hungry campaign. We ran that for 2 separate months, and we were able to, with our community support and certainly support from other organizations, $750,000 was raised that we were able to put out to food pantries, put out to organizations who were providing meals. We just said, go in, put an application, and here's your allocation. We're going to give this to you. We just did it really more in that case for the record keeping of it. But if it was an emergency fund, we didn't ask for much. And again, it was like a fire hose, just trying to figure out, put out this fire. And so we did not want to be a burden. But if it came to a regular grant, and now it's kind of shifting back to more of those regular grants, we do ask them for outcomes. So that we can evaluate the effectiveness of the grant and certainly see how the organization has been able to move a needle in one way or another by their program.
Yeah, by no means, Kathy, should you feel you own that, because we still do too. We obviously work with a lot of donor advised funds, and if we're giving a grant, often the donor, we're trying to please both sides. So the donor likes to have outputs as well. So rest assured, we're still asking for outcomes.
So the next lesson is coming together to affect policy. And Kathy, I know that you are especially passionate about funders' impact on policy change. And so can you talk about why this is critical to ending hunger and how you're committed to impacting policy change?
Sure. I was invited to a panel with several folks in the community, and we were all talking about, life post-COVID. And, one of the things that I said, if we don't collectively begin to try to affect policy change, 10 years from now, the same group of people are going to be having the same conversation. And I think change in policy, and that was really evident today by many of our speakers, said we have to change policy or we're going to be here in the same spot. We're just going to be stuck. We have to address the cliff. We have to address the fact that people are disincented to continue to strive and come from poverty because they're disincented to do that. They lose the safety net. That has to change. And if that does not change, again, we're all going to be doing the same thing for a very long time. And I don't know that any of us needs to be there. Certainly don't want to be there. So I do think it's time that we do come together and have a voice as a philanthropic group.
Jillian, I know this is a big one for you too, so jump in.
Yeah, so anybody that knows me knows I cut my teeth in this region in public policy, right? So I feel really, really passionate about it and everything that Kathy shared. And I think that for those who need the services, there's still a long way to go, right? Like I think about SNAP and the fact that SNAP does not cover things, the basic needs like personal and feminine hygiene items or diapers. That's a problem, right? That's such an oversight. And so many people are so floored to learn that. Like they cannot believe that those basic necessities that everybody needs, that these individuals and communities and families that are, below the poverty threshold don't have access to those particular products. And anybody who is involved with a food pantry or food bank knows that you can't get those products stocked and stayed on the shelf for the life of you. So there's so much opportunity. But I think to Kathy's point, unless we are coming together collectively as a region and agreeing on these 5, and I'm making it up, right? Things need to be immediately changed at a minimum at the state level, or at the city level, municipal, whatever it may be. We're going to be right back here year after year because we can come together as a collective funding community and focus collectively on specific things for that systemic change. But the only way that it becomes permanent, right, is if the policy aspect comes along with us. So it's really a matter of our public officials trusting in the community and the nonprofit partners who know the needs the best and then trusting their needs and really taking that into consideration when making changes. And most importantly, consulting those doing the work, right, before changes are made. So often policy changes are made and nobody's consulting those that are going to be impacted the most. And then they're flabbergasted that it didn't work, right, or that it wasn't effective or it created additional hurdles. So that's just truly unacceptable. And there's no reason for that. So we have so much opportunity collectively in this region. We've really come together. Let's maintain that focus and bring it into other impactful areas.
I agree with you 100%. Affecting policy change is more likely to happen when we come together. So that leads us to the final lesson, which is collaboration among funders and nonprofits to create outcomes of the greatest magnitude. And the COVID-19 Fund is a great example of how funders convened across the Capital Region to raise and disseminate more than $1.5 million in a very short amount of time. And my firm and I were very honored to be a part of this initiative. I'm so grateful to have met and to have worked with all of you on addressing the most critical needs of our communities last year in this way. And if there was a silver lining for me, it was coming together with all of you. And Shelley, since your organization, the Community Foundation for the Greater Capital Region, was one of the convening organizations, can you talk about why it was necessary and why it worked?
Yeah, of course. So the Capital Region COVID-19 Response Fund was the result of funders coming together to face an issue that was too large to be faced alone. It was an informal and short-term collaboration to create collective impact. We worked with over 40 funders who provided not just funding support, but community knowledge and ties, which was huge. As I mentioned previously, we were able to grant $1,171,000 unrestricted dollars, and it reached 11 different counties in our region, which we can't always do either. So that was a big deal. The first set of grants went out in late March of 2020, and they were earmarked definitely for food access programs. The very first grants were food access programs. And it's safe to say that over half of the total amount of funding from the Response Fund went to address basic needs, including food. The collaboration, it was really a result of trusted partners working with trusted partners.
That's terrific. Thank you. And Kathy, I know you were a really strong voice at the table. So can you talk about how you came to join the initiative and the valuable role that you played with the fund?
Sure. I heard a saying the other day that I thought was really important to share today. It's, walls turned on their sides are bridges. And I think that, as a funding community, we came together. The walls that we have in our own organizations came down, and we all worked together. And the reason we worked together was really to ensure that the funding out there was as equitable as possible. And that was really an important piece of the funding. When by the time the group was formed, we had already put out a significant amount of money into the community. So although we didn't invest money into the community, into the fund, I was very graciously asked to sit at the table. And I think what it was really important, I shared completely, was completely transparent of who we funded, what we funded, where the money went, even on the No Neighbor Hungry piece. And so I think it was important that we all came from a place of trust. We all came from a place to ensure equity in our funding across the regions. And that, again, we just kind of all dug in together and said, what are you hearing? And this is what I'm hearing. And then being able to meet those needs as they came forward. So I have to commend the group who put the fund together. It was genius, and I think hopefully from this effort, we'll learn that it's important that we do stay connected and we do listen to each other and work together as we build those bridges to help the nonprofit community.
Absolutely. And Jillian, I know that you are super passionate about bringing funders together as well and convening for the greater good. So if there's anybody watching today who needs to be convinced, I know that you're the person to do that. So why should funders be coming together, and what would you like to see funders do here in the Capital Region?
Yeah, so if I may, right, be so bold to say this, the one silver lining that maybe came out of this pandemic is the fact that funders have come together and brought down some of those walls, right? I think like the simple fact that Kathy and I are both here today from competing institutions speaks volumes, and we've actually connected one-on-one since prep calls and talked about further development together. And I think that's so important. More often, you say the word collaboration to a nonprofit and they shudder. Right. Immediately, people are like, I don't want to lose my backhouse resources and my staff and et cetera. And it's like, that's not what we necessarily mean. Right. Sometimes we're just talking about, instead of creating a new program or initiative, look to the community and see what already exists and find ways to come together to address that need. And I think that that's the same thing for the funding side of things. If we're going to expect and ask that of nonprofits, we need to be willing to do that ourselves. And out of this pandemic, I'm just really hopeful and excited about the opportunity for us to collectively come together for funders and address some of these systemic changes, right? We've talked about the systemic needs in low to moderate income communities. Often those tend to be our most diverse communities, right? So it's really, really important that if we want to have an impact long term, that we come together to do that and figure out, okay, who can fund what? How can we structure the funding? Can we make sure that the vast majority of these resources are going to serving diverse communities that also happen to be low to moderate income communities, right? What can we expect of our nonprofits? Can we ask them collectively together to say, you need to come together as a collaboration when you're applying versus it being a one and done, right? Instead of creating a new program, let's make that connection point and bring some organizations together to meet the full need of the region. Maybe they're looking to expand, but to bring a service that already exists at a particular county. Okay, maybe they need an introduction to the nonprofit already offering that service and find how they can kind of have a collaboration, but still maintain their individual 501c3 numbers, right? So if that's something that we are willing collectively to do, which I think there's a lot of value in doing it, I think that really will help move the needle and the direction in which we really, really need to bring things, right? If we're willing to do it as funders and come together and be thoughtful and be mindful and make sure that we're all focusing on the right things for our region, I think it's fair to ask that of our nonprofit community. So I'm just really excited at the potential of that down the line, right? And most importantly, coming from a financial institution, looking and partnering with other financial institutions on initiatives, which has historically been something that we've kind of shied away from, but using this opportunity to turn our walls into bridges, like Kathy said, and come together collectively, I think it's really, really important that we do so.
Absolutely. Funders coming together and nonprofits coming together, both moving the needle. I know that each of you have your finger on the pulse of the needs across many, many, many relationships, and that you do your best to help nonprofits convene. Shelley, I guess I want to hear from you. Why is it important to embrace that concept? Why do you think that nonprofits really need to be doing that? And can you share some examples of maybe success that you have seen bringing some community partners together aside from the COVID fund?
Yeah, so I mean, probably, unfortunately, as we all know, resources are limited. So there's just not enough funds to go around, for all the needs in the community. So it's important that, as funders, our goal is always to connect not-for-profits to other resources to help them achieve their service goals, if you will. So maybe one of the best examples just recently is 2 of our local children's museums have been struggling. Obviously, museums have struggled through the pandemic. And so one of the board members reached out, and they are looking to do an affiliation, which is a wonderful word because that really recognizes that each of the organizations has very strong assets, and they're both bringing something to the table that's a little bit different. So they're going to dissolve one of the physical locations and end up in one location, but one of the organizations has wonderful outreach programs, wonderful education programs. And so, and the other one has really good exhibits and, kind of caters to the younger crowd. So it's going to be a wonderful affiliation. They've worked with Nikon, working out the details. We've been able to get them some funding from some of the private foundations, and our community impact was also able to support that, which is wonderful. I always say we like to support good behavior, but it's really just about both of them sustaining their own image. And I think it's going to work out very nicely. So that's a terrific example, of 2 organizations coming together in a way that they're both comfortable with, and it's really going to benefit not just them, but also the community.
That's terrific. So with these lessons, there are key takeaways for action and change. While it may seem that the worst of the pandemic is behind us, now that mask mandates are being lifted and people are being vaccinated and life is starting to revert to normal, the reality is that hunger is still a major issue, and it is going to require ongoing and consistent support. So Jillian, what program or funding ideas did you initiate as a result of the pandemic that will live on long after the pandemic is over?
Sure. Yeah. I'm hoping that you guys can still hear me okay, because I feel like I'm having some Wi-Fi issues over here. So can you just nod if you can hear me all right?
Okay.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
All good.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, ladies. I appreciate it. So thank you. So one of the things that we have kind of spiraled out of the pandemic and out of that 1.25 or 5-year initiative that I had mentioned previously is this jobs initiative. And you heard me say how food insecurity directly affects other things, just how other things directly affect food insecurity, right? So we're hyper-focused on connecting and offering systemic change, where we're connecting a sourcing system, if you will, of diverse talent, which we have a plethora of in this region, directly into training and curriculum programs, which then go directly into employment. And these individuals are mostly coming out of low or moderate income communities that experience food insecurity, right? So by getting them access to this free training and then getting them access to direct employment, they will then hopefully be able to, on their own, come and address the food insecurity that they or their family are experiencing, right? That domino effect that we talked about previously. So this is something that we have been working on, and we will continue to be working on for years to come, but we are bringing partners along the way. So we have a handful of targeted nonprofits that we're working with initially, along with the 2 local community colleges and a couple of local employers. But once everything is stood up, there's going to be opportunity for growth and expansion in that initiative in an effort to address additional industries. And I know that Kathy and I have had conversations around coming together around some of the work that they're doing at SEFCU and bringing it along the way with some of the work that we're doing at Bank of America. So I would just like.
Oh, I think we lost your audio. Sounds like we lost Jillian. Well, that sounds like a terrific program. So excited to hear that, Kathy, you and Jillian are talking about that. That's going to be some absolutely incredible work and very impactful and important to the community. Shelly, I have a 2-part question for you. So what do you hope is learned about food insecurity after the pandemic, and how do we ensure the need for food system support remains front and center with funders?
So, okay, that's an excellent question. So I think the pandemic has taught us all humility and empathy, and that food insecurity can strike at any time. There were individuals and families utilizing food pantries during the pandemic that had never had food insecurity before. I hope this taught us as funders to understand and appreciate the magnitude of food insecurity and how fragile is the line between needing assistance and not needing assistance, basically. Obviously, food insecurity will not end when the COVID-19 pandemic ends. I think we all just need to work together to find systemic ways to tackle this problem. And I think we just need to talk about it and talk about it and talk about it and just keep bringing it up and, you know, and just be committed to it, if you will.
Agreed. Before I open it up to Q&A, because it looks like we do have a couple of questions, I would love for each of you to share the most critical step that we need to take as individuals or as a community to end hunger. And let's start with Kat.
Wow, the most critical step, I think, is to continue to talk about this. And, you know, one of the things that came from the pandemic is, you know, I stream the Today Show while I'm getting ready. So I feel like I have some connection to the outside world. And, you know, you couldn't watch any news show without seeing hunger being an issue and raised as an issue. And so this became not just in our community an issue, it was a national reckoning, an awareness of the severity of hunger. So I think we need to continue to keep our eye on the prize, and we need to understand that this is not going to happen quickly, but we all have to dig in and find ways to work on the solving end of this spectrum. Absolutely continue to serve, but we have to dig in and begin to really look at solving it for the long haul.
Absolutely. Jillian, how about you?
Yeah, I would agree with everything that Kathy just said. I think coming together collectively and continuing to deliver on things as a community, whether it's funders and nonprofits, that's going to be the only way that we're going to be successful in addressing these things long term.
Absolutely. And Shelley, last but not least.
Yeah, I definitely echo, you know, what Kathy and Jillian said, and I think it's going to be very important for us to listen to the organizations that are doing the work, because they are, you know, hands-on, know exactly what's going on. And, you know, I was thinking about what it takes to solve an issue like this, and you know what, we may all have to be very courageous too, and go out on a limb sometimes, and you know, go outside of our comfort zone, think outside the box. We need to not be afraid to do that.
Absolutely. All incredible nuggets of insight to reflect on as we leave here today and create even more meaningful change. So thank you. We're going to take a look at some of the questions that have come into the comments. And the first question is from John Sweeney. And his question is, as we move towards post-pandemic life, will funders be moving away from operational support to supporting infrastructure support, especially needed changes exposed by pandemic demands? So for example, enhanced internet, video conferencing support, and more trucks. Who wants to take that one?
I think we all need to be open, and I think we need to focus on trust-based funding. You know, we know that there are organizations who are doing the work and doing it well. And so this pandemic has caused them to shift perhaps away from some of the traditional programs to deliver services, right? So we need to really just continue to listen. That was one of the main things I tried to do through this whole scenario, is stop and listen to what people were telling me and what are the needs, and to not be posing or imposing my belief or my judgment on what I thought, because what I thought very often was not necessarily always true. So I think we just need to remain diligent, to be open. And if we're all willing to do that, I think we can absolutely continue to meet the needs in really creative and innovative ways.
Terrific. Thank you, Kathy. We have a question from Katie Farrow. Jillian, can you tell us more about your internship program and the focus on engaging youth from diverse backgrounds to receive leadership training?
Yeah, so Katie, thanks for the question. So we have a national program called Student Leaders, and we have that program here locally in the Capital Region, where we offer 2 summer internships with a local nonprofit institution. We pay for the kids. The kids get paid $17 an hour. They work full-time, 35 hours a week for 8 weeks. And that includes this year virtual summit, but in normal circumstances, an in-person full week summit in DC, all expenses paid for our student leaders. But it is hyper focused on providing the opportunity to students, rising juniors and seniors, and from diverse backgrounds, access to this internship program and engaging them in our nonprofit community. It's a really incredible program. We have 2 this year. We have a young lady from Albany High School and another from Colony High School, and they are going to be interning virtually with the United Way of the Greater Capital Region this summer.
That's terrific. Great program. Tracy Martin has a question for Kathy. How does the Freight Farm work in terms of staffing? Does it take one full-time person, a part-time person, etc.? And can you grow more than lettuce in them?
Yes, we have a full-time farmer at CEFCU. When we first got the farm, we were unsure as to what it was really all going to be. So we had a full-time farmer and one staff member who was in there 12 hours a week. And that was really needed at the time to get it set up. You go to farm school and then it's like, go. Okay, what does that really mean? So we do have a full-time farmer, Megan, who does an absolutely outstanding job. Yes, you can grow more than lettuce. Our machine is called the Leafy Green machine. There has been advances in the farms since our farm, but it's really meant to grow leafy greens. So we grow a lot of herbs, different lettuce varieties. We're constantly, doing a little R&D. We tried to grow radishes. That didn't work so hot, so we're not doing that anymore. But I think for us, what comes out of that farm is absolutely beautiful produce. The basil leaves are as big as my hand. It's just absolutely gorgeous, fresh, organically grown produce. And so again, we try to push it to the envelope, but we also listen to our community. So the South End Children's Cafe said, we want to cook more culturally appropriate or sensitive food. Can you grow collards? So we started to grow collard greens in the farm. So we can really kind of tailor it a little bit to meet the needs of the nonprofit communities that we're serving. So because it's different. And so we need to be open to that, and we need to be willing to experiment. But some folks grow tomatoes in their farms. It's really, what is your goal? Our goal is yield. We want to get the most out. So we don't do a lot of experimentation of other things, but you absolutely can.
That's exciting. And it looks like we have time for one more question. So question from Tamara McCallum to the entire group, whoever would like to take this. What work have your organizations done to bring different voices to the table and to ensure that leadership demographics within the organization match the demographics of the communities you serve?
That's an excellent question and completely relevant, in this time, the time that we live in right now. We actually have added a question to some of our applications that asks that specific, because it's not something we've ever really thought about or talked about in the past. Here we are, we need to start talking about these things. We've actually added a question that said, how representative of the population you serve is your board and your staff? So again, it's really just bringing it up at this point, because obviously no one's going to get penalized if they're not. We at the foundation are working very hard to make sure that we are not only geographically as well, so not just other populations, but we want to make sure we're geographically diverse. So that is a big issue right now. And again, one that I think we just need to just start talking about and figuring out what works and what's appropriate and how do we make that happen.
And Shelley, you're being modest because the Community Foundation also supported a board training for diverse candidates to get more diversity on our board. It's something I know we were a part of funding. It was a conversation that was years in the making, yes. And we were able to do that this year, which one of our staff members actually participated in, and it was a game changer for her. She's already on a board.
That's great.
Yeah. So we also funded a board diversity training for a couple of our staff through the African American Credit Union Coalition. So I think we've done the same. We've increased, asked on our applications. We asked for the board members. We asked for the DEI statement. How many of their staff are diverse staff members? So we're really trying to dive in and get better at this. But we have work to do, and I recognize that.
Agreed.
Well, thank you so much. I wish that we had more time, but we do have to wrap it up. And so I would love to thank our panel, to all of you, for sharing your time and your perspective today, for your leadership, for all the incredible impact that you're making in our communities. And thanks to all of you who joined us today and asked questions. We're actively engaged. There were some terrific comments and dialogue that was happening in the comment section. So thank you. Hopefully you're leaving today with some valuable insight and takeaways from the funder's perspective. Thanks again.
Thank you, Marcia.
Thanks, Marcia. Thanks, ladies.
Thank you.